The Concordance Nexus towered like a crystalline nightmare, its impossible geometry defying human understanding. Massive holographic displays stretched across corridors wider than entire Earth cities, each surface pulsing with data streams that would have driven a human mind to madness. Dr. Elena Rodriguez walked these halls with the practiced invisibility of someone who understood that true power resided in observation, not performance. Her neural-linked contact lenses flickered imperceptibly, running quantum probability simulations beneath her seemingly disinterested gaze. To the assembled alien delegates, she was just another unremarkable human. Short, slightly built, with skin the color of burnished copper and eyes that seemed to absorb more than they reflected. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot, her diplomatic suit deliberately unremarkable, a canvas of muted charcoal that seemed to blend into the background. The concordance chamber was a masterpiece of xeno-architecture. Gravity wells shifted subtly to accommodate the dozen different species present. The Carlith representatives floated in their methane bubbles, crystalline appendages shifting in patterns of communication incomprehensible to most. Nearby, the silicon-based Krelix delegation stood like living obsidian statues, their fractal surfaces catching and refracting light in impossible geometric patterns. Holographic translators hummed with constant activity, converting a cacophony of languages, biological signals, and electromagnetic communications. The human delegation will now present its qualifications, announced Arvik, the Concordance's senior diplomatic arbiter. His voice was a calculated blend of condescension and barely concealed amusement. A ripple of soft chittering and electromagnetic pulses of derision passed through the assembled alien representatives. Elena knew the statistics by heart. Humanity had only achieved faster-than-light travel 43 standard galactic years ago. Their total explored space constituted less than 0.03% of the Concordance's mapped territories. Earth's technological achievements were considered so primitive that most advanced species viewed humans with the same clinical detachment one might reserve for an interesting, but ultimately inconsequential biological sample. Her neural implant, AI, cutting-edge piece of human technology that most aliens didn't even realize existed, began parsing the chamber's communication layers. Where others saw a diplomatic meeting, Elena saw a complex system of power dynamics, unspoken tensions, and carefully maintained illusions. A holographic display glitched. It was almost imperceptible. A microsecond of interference that would have meant nothing to anyone else. But Elena's mind was different. Her brain had been subtly augmented through a classified human adaptation program, designed to process information at speeds and in patterns that defied conventional neural mapping. The glitch revealed something, a momentary overlap in communication protocols, a hidden signal riding beneath the primary diplomatic transmissions. Most of the delegates were focused on the current speaker, a Zorn collective representative explaining the intricacies of their ongoing conflict with the Krelix. Their presentation was a masterwork of diplomatic obfuscation, a performance designed to showcase technological superiority while revealing absolutely nothing of substance. Elena's lenses captured and began analyzing the anomalous signal. Her fingers, resting casually on the smooth surface of her datapad, ran a series of quantum decryption algorithms. She had learned long ago that in galactic diplomacy, the most important conversations happened in the spaces between official statements. The Carlith representative's methane bubble pulsed with a rhythm that suggested barely contained frustration. Elena recognized it immediately, a microaggression hidden within what appeared to be a standard diplomatic transmission. The aliens believed their communication was sophisticated, impenetrable. They were wrong. Arvik continued his introduction, each word dripping with patronizing superiority. The human delegation represents a species still struggling with basic interstellar navigation. Their presence here is... The glitch happened again, larger this time. Elena's lips remained perfectly still, but her neural implant was now fully engaged. Something was happening, something the other delegates hadn't noticed, something that would change everything. The first seeds of a plan began to take root in her mind, complex, dangerous, and utterly unexpected. The Concordants thought they were presenting humanity with an impossible challenge. They had no idea what was coming. No idea at all. The holographic display materialized with brutal precision, casting a cold light across the Concordance chamber. 12 trillion lives lost. 12 trillion souls consumed by a conflict that had raged for 3 centuries between the Krellix and the Zorn Collective. A war so complex that it had become a living mythology of destruction. Arvik's tentacular appendages rippled with a mixture of challenge and contempt as he addressed the human delegation. We present to you the tri-stellar conflict. Resolve this, and perhaps humanity might prove itself marginally relevant to galactic diplomacy. Elena understood the challenge for what it truly was, a public execution of human diplomatic credibility. The holographic representation of the conflict bloomed around her, a 3-dimensional nightmare of stellar cartography. Entire star systems were marked in varying shades of destruction, some reduced to radioactive dust, others transformed into computational graveyards where billions of consciousnesses had been digitally erased. The Krellix and Zorn Collective represented 2 of the most technologically advanced civilizations in known space. The Krellix were silicon-based entities, their bodies composed of intricate crystalline structures that could reshape themselves with molecular precision. They communicated through complex quantum entanglement, their consciousness distributed across massive computational matrices. The Zorn Collective, by contrast, existed as a pure energy matrix, beings of electromagnetic consciousness that could inhabit entire planetary computational networks. They viewed physical matter as a primitive constraint, their existence a constant flow of information and potential. Between these 2 titans, entire galactic sectors had become graveyards of failed diplomacy. Dr. Marcus Chen, the lead human diplomatic researcher, leaned closer to Elena. "They're setting us up to fail," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "No diplomatic mission has even come close to resolving this conflict." Elena's neural implant was already processing vast streams of data. Where others saw an impossible conflict, she saw a complex system of interconnected failures. Her fingers danced almost imperceptibly across her datapad, pulling together seemingly unrelated fragments of information. Communication logs from minor trade negotiations, entertainment media transmissions, economic trade records, cultural exchange archives dating back centuries. To the casual observer, her research looked like a chaotic mess. But Elena was constructing something far more dangerous than a traditional diplomatic solution. A pattern was emerging. The Krellix representative, a massive crystalline entity that shifted and refracted light like a living prism, projected its own historical narrative. Centuries of supposed grievances, territorial disputes that spanned entire star systems. The Zorn Collective countered with their own holographic representation, a swirling mass of electromagnetic data that told a completely different story. Most diplomatic teams would try to find a middle ground. Elena was doing something entirely different. She was finding the lie. Not the surface-level fabrications, but the deeper structural deception that had sustained this conflict for generations. The holographic displays continued their elaborate dance of mutual accusation. But Elena's eyes were fixed on something else entirely. A subtle communication protocol, a shared linguistic anomaly that appeared in both species' historical archives, something that most researchers would dismiss as a mere translation error. But Elena knew better. "This isn't just a conflict," she murmured so quietly that only her immediate team could hear. "This is a system, a machine designed to perpetuate itself." The Concordance delegates continued their performative diplomacy, clearly expecting the human delegation to offer some naive, simplistic solution. They would be disappointed. Elena's neural implant completed its first stage analysis. The preliminary results were unexpected. The conflict between the Krellix and Zorn Collective was not what it appeared to be. Not a war of territorial expansion. Not a clash of fundamental ideological differences. Something far more insidious was at play, a perfect mechanism of perpetual conflict. And Elena Rodriguez was about to tear it apart. The first seeds of her strategy began to take shape. A solution so unconventional that it would shatter everything the Concordance believed about diplomatic resolution, about humanity, about the very nature of intelligent conflict. The impossible gauntlet had been thrown down, and Elena was about to show them exactly what humanity was capable of. The research facility was a controlled chaos of human ingenuity. Holographic displays cascaded around Elena like digital waterfalls, each stream of data a potential thread in an impossibly complex tapestry. Her team watched in a mixture of confusion and growing admiration as she began to piece together something that defied traditional diplomatic analysis. Dr. Yuki Nakamura, Elena's closest colleague, broke the silence. "You're treating this like a living organism," she observed, her voice a blend of scientific curiosity and professional skepticism. Elena's lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. "Exactly. The tristellar conflict isn't a war. It's a system. An ecosystem of conflict that's been sustained for generations." Her neural implant worked in perfect synchronization with a custom-built quantum analysis array. Where conventional, diplomatic research looked at surface-level interactions, Elena was diving into the genetic code of the conflict itself. She began projecting a series of interconnected holographic models. The first showed the traditional diplomatic view of the conflict, a complex web of territorial disputes, resource conflicts, and ideological differences. The second model looked identical at first glance, but subtle differences began to emerge. Hidden communication patterns, economic flows that didn't match official narratives, cultural transmission vectors that suggested something far more insidious than a straightforward war. "Look here," Elena said, highlighting a seemingly innocuous trade route that had existed for centuries. To most observers, it was a minor economic channel, but her analysis revealed it as something else entirely, a perfect mechanism for perpetuating conflict. The Krelix and Zorn collective had developed a symbiotic relationship that actually required the continuation of their war, not for territorial gain, not for resource acquisition, but for something far more fundamental to their societal structures: cultural maintenance. "They're not fighting a war," Elena explained to her increasingly fascinated team. "They're performing a centuries-long ritual of cultural identity. Each major conflict served as a reset mechanism for both civilizations. Wars weren't about winning or losing. They were about maintaining a delicate balance of societal tension that prevented internal transformation." Dr. Chen approached the holographic display, his traditional diplomatic training warring with the revolutionary insight Elena was presenting. "That's impossible," he muttered, but his eyes told a different story. Elena had discovered something profound. The conflict wasn't a problem to be solved through traditional diplomatic means. It was a complex adaptive system that actively resisted resolution. Her approach drew from an unexpected source: human historical studies of prolonged conflicts on Earth. The 100 Years' War, the Cold War. Conflicts that weren't just military engagements, but complex social and psychological phenomena. She began developing a revolutionary translation matrix that did something unprecedented. It wouldn't just convert language, it would recontextualize communication itself. The neural implant worked, in perfect synchronization with her brilliant, unconventional mind. Elena was creating a diplomatic tool that was part linguistic algorithm, part psychological intervention, part systemic analysis. A holographic representation of the Krelix communication. Protocols began to break down, not through technological intrusion, but through a fundamental reimagining of their communication structure. "We're not going to solve this conflict," Elena told her team. "We're going to make the conflict itself obsolete." Her approach drew from multiple disciplines: xenolinguistics, advanced game theory, cultural anthropology, psychological systems analysis. Where other diplomatic teams saw a problem to be negotiated, Elena saw a complex adaptive system to be understood. The Concordance believed they were presenting an impossible challenge to humanity. They had no idea what was coming. The first prototype of her translation matrix began to take shape. a tool that was less about converting words and more about revealing the hidden psychological structures that had sustained the conflict for centuries. Dr. Nakamura watched in growing amazement. "This isn't diplomacy," she whispered. "This is something else entirely." Elena's eyes reflected the cascading holographic data. A perfect storm of human creativity was taking shape, an approach so fundamentally different that it would shatter everything the Concordance believed about conflict resolution. The invisible strategy was becoming visible, and the galaxy would never be the same. The attack came precisely 72 hours after Elena's initial presentation. Not a physical assault. Those were primitive by galactic standards. This was a surgical strike of bureaucratic destruction, designed to completely discredit her research and eliminate any potential threat to the established diplomatic order. Director Arvik of the Concordance Diplomatic Corps activated Protocol Omega-9, a classified procedure reserved for diplomatic threats deemed potentially destabilizing to galactic power structures. Elena's research file was systematically quarantined, her access credentials systematically revoked, and a comprehensive disinformation campaign began to undermine her credibility. In the central tribunal of the Concordance, holographic representations of senior diplomatic entities from across known space assembled. Their collective consciousness formed a lattice of interconnected judgment, each representative a node in a complex network designed to maintain the status quo. Dr. Rodriguez's analysis represents a fundamental threat, proclaimed the Karleth representative, its methane bubble pulsing with calculated indignation. Her proposed resolution mechanism would destabilize centuries of carefully maintained diplomatic equilibrium. Elena sat perfectly still, her neural implant recording every microscopic communication pattern, every subtle electromagnetic leak of information. She wasn't just listening. She was mapping the entire system of resistance. Dr. Marcus Chen leaned close, his voice a barely audible whisper. "They're going to bury us, completely and systematically." Evidence began to disappear. Digital records were altered, communication logs mysteriously fragmented. It was a coordinated assault designed to make Elena's research look like nothing more than an amateur's wild speculation. But Elena had anticipated this. Her original research was distributed across multiple, quantum-encrypted networks, each fragment protected by adaptive encryption protocols developed by a classified human intelligence adaptation program. What the Concordance saw was exactly what she wanted them to see. A honeypot of misinformation designed to draw out their true methods of suppression. The tribunal's primary attack vector was information control. They would isolate, discredit, and ultimately erase any challenge to their established diplomatic paradigms. The human delegation's proposal, announced Arvik, his multifaceted communication tendrils weaving a pattern of bureaucratic dismissal, fails to meet even the most basic standards of interstellar diplomatic protocol. A holographic representation of Elena's research materialized, deliberately manipulated to appear nonsensical and fragmented. Complex data streams were twisted, mathematical models distorted, creating a version of her work that looked like the ravings of an intellectual novice. Elena watched and waited. Her team looked defeated. Dr. Chen's shoulders had slumped, the weight of institutional resistance pressing down on him. But Elena remained perfectly calm. Each manipulation was another piece of data, another insight into the system's fundamental weaknesses. The Zorn Collective's representative, a being of pure electromagnetic consciousness, entered the tribunal's communication matrix. Its presence was a wave of calculated dismissal. The human proposal demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding of multidimensional conflict resolution. What they didn't realize was that Elena had already won. Every attempt to suppress her research was another thread in the complex tapestry she was weaving. Each bureaucratic maneuver, each digital manipulation was being captured, analyzed, and integrated into her broader understanding of the conflict's systemic nature. Her neural implant was recording everything. Not just the surface-level communications, but the microscopic information leaks, the quantum-level communication artifacts that most species couldn't even perceive. Dr. Nakamura caught Elena's eye. A momentary connection passed between them, a shared understanding that what was happening was exactly what Elena had planned. The tribunal believed they were destroying her research. In reality, they were proving every single one of her hypotheses. A subtle smile played across Elena's lips. The more they tried to suppress her, the more comprehensive her understanding became. Institutional resistance wasn't a barrier. It was a feature of the system she was analyzing. The concordants thought they were shutting her down. They had no idea they were giving her exactly what she needed. Piece by piece, the invisible strategy was taking shape, and the galaxy was about to change forever. The first breakthrough came in the most unexpected moment of total silence. Deep within the Concordance's most secure communication vault, Elena's translation matrix began to pulse with an almost living rhythm. What had begun as a theoretical, linguistic algorithm was transforming into something far more profound, a key that could unlock the deepest psychological wounds of two entire civilizations. Dr. Yuki Nakamura watched in growing amazement as the holographic displays began to shift. Lines of communication that had been static for centuries started to vibrate with new potential. "It's not just translating," she whispered. "It's recontextualizing." Elena's approach went beyond language. She had discovered something far more fundamental: the psychological infrastructure that had sustained the Krellix and Zorn collectives' centuries-long conflict. Every communication protocol carried more than words. They carried trauma, generational pain, a complex emotional ecosystem that had become so normalized that the warring civilizations couldn't even recognize their own patterns of destruction. The Krellix communication matrix was a crystalline nightmare of mathematical precision. Each transmission was a complex geometric algorithm that carried not just information, but entire cultural memories. Their silicon-based consciousness recorded every interaction as a permanent three-dimensional memory structure. The Zorn collective, by contrast, existed as a pure energy matrix, their communication a constant flow of electromagnetic potential that carried the weight of generations of conflict. Elena's translation matrix began to do something unprecedented. It wasn't just converting language. It was revealing the hidden emotional architectures that had sustained the conflict. A holographic representation materialized, showing the communication patterns between the two civilizations. What had appeared to be a complex web of diplomatic exchanges now revealed itself as something else entirely: a perfect mechanism of mutual psychological destruction. "They're not just fighting a war," Elena explained to her increasingly stunned team. "They're performing a collective trauma response. Each major conflict served as a psychological reset mechanism. Wars weren't about territorial gain or resource acquisition. They were elaborate ritualistic performances of cultural identity, designed to prevent any genuine resolution." The translation matrix began to break down the communication barriers, revealing layers of suppressed emotional content that had been buried for generations. Historical transmissions showed not just military engagements, but a complex dance of mutual psychological reinforcement. Dr. Marcus Chen approached the holographic display, his traditional diplomatic training collapsing in the face of Elena's revolutionary insight. "This is impossible," he muttered, but the evidence was overwhelming. Elena had discovered the psychological equivalent of a perpetual motion machine, a conflict so perfectly designed that it could sustain itself indefinitely. The Krellix representatives would be the first to feel the impact. Their crystalline communication structures began to resonate with frequencies they had never experienced. Centuries of carefully maintained psychological barriers started to develop microscopic fractures. A Zorn collective communication node began to pulse with an unexpected rhythm. Something was changing at a fundamental level. The translation matrix was doing more than translating. It was healing. Each transmission now carried not just the historical weight of conflict, but the potential for something else: understanding, recognition, the first tentative steps toward genuine communication. "We're not solving the conflict," Elena told her team. "We're revealing the mechanism that has sustained it." The Concordance monitoring systems began to light up. Something unprecedented was happening. Communication patterns between the Krellex and Zorn Collective were shifting in ways that defied all previous diplomatic models. Dr. Nakamura watched the holographic displays with growing excitement. "They're actually listening to each other," she said, her voice a mixture of scientific amazement and human hope. Elena's strategy was elegant in its simplicity. She wasn't trying to stop the conflict. She was giving both civilizations the tools to see themselves, truly see themselves, for the first time. The psychological warfare had begun, but this time, the weapon was understanding, and the galaxy would never be the same. The first crack in the galactic system appeared on a Tuesday quantum. Communication networks across the concordance began to tremble with an unprecedented resonance. What had been a perfectly calibrated system of diplomatic obfuscation started to reveal its true nature. A complex machinery of perpetual conflict that had been maintained for centuries. The Krellex primary communication matrix, a massive crystalline network that spanned entire star systems, began to exhibit behavior that defied all known scientific understanding. Microscopic fractures appeared in its transmission protocols, each tiny break revealing layers of suppressed historical trauma that had been compressed into its very molecular structure. "It's like watching a crystal slowly reveal its hidden memories," Dr. Yuki Nakamura breathed, her eyes fixed on the holographic displays that surrounded Elena Rodriguez. Elena remained perfectly still, her neural implant processing billions of data points per second. She wasn't just observing the breakdown, she was guiding it. The Zorn Collective's energy matrix responded next. Electromagnetic patterns that had been locked in a rigid dance of conflict for generations began to shift. It was as if something fundamental was being rewritten at the quantum level of their collective consciousness. Diplomatic channels erupted in panic. Senior representatives from across the concordance watched in growing horror as Elena's translation matrix continued its inexorable work. This wasn't just a diplomatic breakthrough. This was a systematic deconstruction of an entire galactic power structure. Arvik, the senior diplomatic arbiter, found himself unable to process the magnitude of what was happening. The communication protocols that had defined interstellar diplomacy for generations were crumbling in real time. "She's not just resolving a conflict," one Karlith representative transmitted in a burst of panicked electromagnetic pulses. "She's destroying the entire system of galactic governance." And they were right. Elena's approach went far beyond traditional conflict resolution. She had identified something far more profound, the systemic mechanisms that maintained conflict as a fundamental organizing principle of galactic civilization. The translation matrix began to reveal the true nature of the tristellar conflict. It wasn't a war between two civilizations. It was a carefully maintained performance of identity, a complex ritual of mutual destruction that had become so normalized that neither the Krellex nor the Zorn Collective could imagine an alternative existence. Historical transmissions began to flow freely for the first time. Centuries of suppressed communication, of carefully managed narratives came flooding through the translation matrix. Dr. Marcus Chen watched in growing amazement as entire chapters of galactic history began to rewrite themselves. "My God," he whispered, "we're watching a civilization learn to communicate for the first time." The Krellex representatives, massive crystalline entities that had existed in a state of perpetual conflict, began to experience something unprecedented: empathy, understanding, the ability to see their supposed enemies as something more than abstract threats. The Zorn Collective's energy matrix started to pulse with a new rhythm. No longer a weapon of war, but a potential vehicle of communication. Elena's strategy was ruthlessly elegant. She wasn't trying to stop the conflict. She was revealing the mechanisms that had sustained it, forcing both civilizations to confront the fundamental lie that had defined their existence. Diplomatic communication channels across the concordance began to break down. The carefully maintained illusion of galactic stability was crumbling in real time. "This is more than a diplomatic solution," Elena explained to her stunned team. "This is a fundamental reimagining of how civilizations communicate." The first direct communication between Krellex and Zorn collective representatives in 3 centuries occurred, not through traditional diplomatic channels, not through carefully managed protocols, but through pure, unfiltered understanding. 3. Galactic power structure trembled, and humanity had just shown the universe exactly what it was capable of. The aftermath was nothing short of revolutionary. Entire star systems watched in collective shock as the fundamental structures of galactic diplomacy collapsed and reformed. Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of a transformation that would redefine intelligent communication across known space. The Concordance Tribunal convened an emergency session, a gathering that looked more like a funeral than a diplomatic meeting. Holographic representations of senior delegates flickered with an unprecedented mix of fear, confusion, and reluctant admiration. Humanity was never supposed to be a threat, muttered Arvik, his multifaceted communication tendrils writhing with barely contained anxiety. You were supposed to be a footnote, a primitive species struggling to understand basic interstellar protocols. Elena's response was a study in calculated calm. We were never struggling, she said, her voice cutting through the complex electromagnetic transmissions like a quantum blade. We were observing, learning, understanding. The true magnitude of her achievement began to crystallize. What she had done was far more than resolve a conflict. She had revealed the fundamental weaknesses in how advanced civilizations conceptualized communication, conflict, and mutual understanding. Dr. Yuki Nakamura's preliminary analysis began to circulate through secure channels. The translation matrix wasn't just a diplomatic tool. It was a complete reimagining of interspecies communication. Mathematical models showed how the algorithm could potentially be adapted to resolve conflicts across hundreds of different species and communication paradigms. The Krellex delegation, once a monolithic block of crystalline aggression, had begun to fragment. Not in destruction, but in understanding. Their rigid communication structures were slowly transforming, developing micro-flexibilities that suggested a complete evolutionary leap. The Zorn Collective's energy matrix pulsed with unprecedented complexity. Centuries of compressed conflict were being reprocessed, transformed from a weapon of mutual destruction into a potential vehicle of genuine communication. This is more than diplomacy, Dr. Marcus Chen observed, his traditional diplomatic training completely dismantled. This is a new form of intelligence. Galactic research institutions began to scramble. Elena's approach challenged everything. They understood about conflict resolution, communication theory, and interspecies interaction. Universities and diplomatic academies across known space began to reconstruct their entire curriculum. The most terrifying aspect for the existing power structures was the simplicity of her solution. No advanced technological weapon, no complex computational matrix, just a profound understanding of the psychological mechanisms that sustained conflict. Classified reports began to leak, carefully controlled information that revealed the true depth of Elena's achievement. She hadn't just resolved a conflict. She had provided a blueprint for understanding that could potentially transform how intelligent species communicate. The Concordance's power structure trembled. Humanity went from being a footnote to becoming the most dangerous unknown quantity in the galaxy. Not through military might, not through technological superiority, but through a revolutionary approach to understanding. Elena's neural implant continued to process the cascading implications. Each new data point revealed another layer of the systemic transformation she had initiated. The translation matrix was evolving, adapting, becoming something that existed beyond traditional technological understanding. We're not just solving conflicts, she explained to her team during a secure briefing. We're revealing the fundamental nature of intelligent communication. The economic implications were staggering. Entire industries built around conflict management began to collapse. Diplomatic institutions that had existed for millennia found themselves obsolete overnight. Arvik approached Elena, a gesture unprecedented in galactic diplomatic history. The senior arbiter's communication tendrils vibrated with a complex mix, of emotions that translated roughly to respect, fear, and grudging admiration. "What you have done," he transmitted, "changes everything." Elena's response was characteristic in its simplicity. "We were always capable of this," she said. "You just never bothered to look closely enough." The human delegation stood as the center of attention, not through aggressive posturing, not through technological displays, but through a profound demonstration of cognitive flexibility that redefined what intelligence could mean. Humanity had just shown the galaxy that the most powerful weapon was understanding, and they were only just beginning. 6 standard galactic cycles after the breakthrough, humanity found itself in a position no one could have predicted. The Concordance Diplomatic Corps had been completely restructured. Where once humanity was a footnote, now they were the most sought-after diplomatic strategists in known space. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of this transformation, though she remained characteristically understated about her achievement. Her office, if it could be called that, was a marvel of interdimensional communication design. Holographic interfaces shimmered with real-time translations from hundreds of different species. Communication matrices that had once been impenetrable now flowed like living information, adapting and reshaping themselves with each interaction. "We're not conquering," Elena would explain to visiting delegations. "We're understanding." The economic implications were staggering. Entire conflict resolution industries had collapsed, replaced by a new paradigm of communication that humanity had pioneered. The translation matrix, now a living, evolving system, had become the most valuable diplomatic tool in galactic history. Dr. Yuki Nakamura's research team continued to expand the capabilities of the communication breakthrough. What had started as a solution to the tristellar conflict was now a comprehensive approach to interspecies communication that was rewriting the fundamental understanding of intelligent interaction. The Krelax and Zorn Collective had undergone a complete transformation. Their centuries-long conflict had dissolved into a collaborative research initiative that was pushing the boundaries of collective intelligence. Representatives from both species now worked alongside human diplomatic teams, their previous enmity replaced by a profound sense of shared understanding. But it wasn't all diplomatic triumph and peaceful collaboration. Many galactic powers viewed humanity's rise with a mixture of fear, respect, and barely contained hostility. The Concordance's previous power structures had been completely dismantled. Species that had maintained control through complex diplomatic manipulations found themselves suddenly vulnerable. Elena understood the delicate nature of their new position. Humanity wasn't conquering through force. They were transforming through understanding, but not everyone appreciated the difference. A classified briefing revealed ongoing tensions. Some galactic powers were developing countermeasures, attempting to understand and potentially neutralize the revolutionary communication approach that humanity had introduced. Dr. Marcus Chen approached Elena with a series of intercepted communication patterns. "They're trying to develop defensive protocols," he said, his voice a mixture of concern and professional curiosity. Elena's neural implant processed the data streams. "Let them try," she responded, a rare hint of something like amusement crossing her typically neutral expression. The human approach to diplomatic strategy had become something far more profound than traditional conflict resolution. It was a complete reimagining of how intelligent species could interact, communicate, and understand each other. Earth had changed as well. The planet that was once considered a backwater of minimal galactic importance was now a hub of diplomatic innovation. Research institutions were overwhelmed with requests from species across known space, all seeking to understand the revolutionary approach that had transformed galactic communication. But Elena knew the work was far from over. The translation matrix continued to evolve. Each new interaction, each new species it encountered, added layers of complexity and understanding. It was becoming something more than a tool, a living system of communication that defied traditional technological understanding. "We're just beginning to understand what's possible," she told a gathering of interdisciplinary researchers. "Communication is more than the exchange of information. It's the creation of shared understanding." The Concordance Diplomatic Awards ceremony was a surreal affair. Elena stood, characteristically understated, as representatives from species that had been enemies for millennia now stood together in mutual respect. Arvik, the senior diplomatic arbiter who had once dismissed humanity, now approached with what could only be described as genuine respect. "You have changed everything," he transmitted, his communication tendrils vibrating with a complex mix of emotions. Elena's response was simple. "We just started listening." As the ceremony concluded, she was already turning her attention to the next challenge. The translation matrix pulsed with potential, revealing hints of communication patterns from species humanity had yet to encounter. The galaxy had changed, and humanity was just getting started.